In a hidden facility, locked away from the eyes of the world for years, a man-made nightmare of uncanny nature stalks darkened halls in pursuit of terrified victims. For the fourth outing in a Jurassic saga, the audience might have witnessed the most terrifying monster yet in the franchise. In this episode of Goji Center, we are not talking about the D-Rex again. Today, we are traveling back about 2 decades to the fourth outing in the Jurassic Park section of the franchise to look at a monster that never was. The progression behind the fourth outing in the Jurassic saga was a long one well before Jurassic World broke the box office in 2015. Ideas for movies that never got made had been kicked around before Jurassic Park even premiered, and Crichton even had the idea for the second novel. After the third film abandoned a more complex plot in favor of people running away from dinosaurs on an island again, it seems a lot of people wanted to do something more unexpected, more strange, or dare we say absolutely crazy for the fourth film. After a few pitched ideas later, and then sci-fi horror writer John Sayles penned a script that got close to getting greenlit, involving a mercenary being hired to train a squad of Deinonychus raptors with small amounts of human and dog DNA as war beasts. The script was already crazy enough as it is, with parachuting dinosaurs, tunneling raptors, and a villain who made Joffrey Lannister seem subtle. Director of JP3 Joe Johnston liked the idea, but somewhere along the way, the idea of going, let's just say, more extreme came up. And by more extreme, we mean absolutely insane compared to what came before. Pitching ideas back and forth with artist Carlos Huante, this was the result. And amongst this monstrous menagerie of dinosaur hybrids meant for blood and carnage, one stood literally head and shoulders above all else. With what limited pre-production information we have and some real-world biology behind the beast, let's have a closer look at what could have been the most uncanny monster in the franchise. In the earlier version of the fourth Jurassic movie script, the obviously not at all evil Grendel Corporation was responsible for making a group of geneticists to engineer a team of trained raptors augmented with little bits of human and dog DNA as attack dogs. Although the idea didn't make it into the final story, some concepts like the raptor strike team and a hybrid creature carried over into later, even more crazy versions of the story. After 2 straight movies with T-Rex being the spotlight and then a Spinosaurus for the third film, something new had to be added to make a threat unlike anything anyone had ever seen. With the previously aforementioned script already having gene splicing to upgrade the raptor's abilities without really changing their appearance much, the mad scientists of this fourth outing could have wound up combining the most dangerous predators to ever exist with one of the most powerful predators of all time. This Tyrannosaur monstrosity that has human DNA, and plenty of it. Allow us to introduce, for possibly the very first time in 3D, what might have been the most uncanny apex predator the franchise would have ever seen. As we have dubbed it, Tyrannos sapiens Huante. With a mostly intact Tyrannosaur snout and no doubt influence on the brain, Tyrannos sapiens would have had a superb sense of smell for tracking and hunting. The eyes and brow taking on a mix of human and dinosaur traits implies great vision, with the human influence perhaps correcting most of the errors the InGen T-Rex seem to sometimes have with their eyesight. Its night vision might not be as good as T-Rex, but it would have plenty of precision, picking out colors and shapes thanks to primate influence, and the sheer size of the eyes would help in seeing in the dark well enough. Hearing would be somewhere in the middle of the two, able to pick up most of the lower frequency sounds T-Rex could detect, while also being privy to the subtle and sharp calls primates can register. All in all, an effective tracker and perceptive predator. But what about its physical capabilities? Admittedly, we don't know exactly how massive this augmented monster could have been had this film been made, but we can make a few guesses. We're going to look at this from a semi-realistic perspective. After all, the writers and creature designers will always be a few pen strokes away from making this animal as big as they wanted. But we'll speculate regardless. When making a complete genome, each genetic addition can affect the body, specifically if it's making up a good chunk of the genome. DNA and the genes involved tell an organism how to form its body. If a huge chunk of the DNA is telling the body to make it like a human, and another huge chunk is telling it to make it like a T-Rex, you're likely going to wind up with something somewhere in the middle. Unless, of course, we're talking about more advanced gene additions like what the Indominus Rex got for things like the cuttlefish chromatophore adaptations for camouflage. If we are indeed talking about an even 50-50 contribution from both human and T-Rex for the body, with Tyrannos sapiens here, because the human contribution would seemingly dilute the DNA telling how to structure a Tyrannosaur body, it should wind up not quite as big as a T-Rex. Likewise, the Tyrannosaur genes would still influence the brain and dilute the effect of the human genes trying to make a human brain. So this thing might not wind up being as smart as a human. This is assuming advanced gene editing technology wasn't used to its full potential. The resulting hybrid would end up somewhere in the middle of the two in terms of power and intelligence. This is why the Indoraptor, with a lot more raptor influence for the body, spliced with the Indominus genome, wasn't as big as the Indominus, but was still bigger than a typical Jurassic-styled raptor, because the Indominus influence was bolstering its size. So, Tyrannos sapiens would have been small, right? Maybe a halfway point between humans and T-Rex, about 3 to 4 tons maybe. Well, about that. If we look at some of the concept art with a human drawn next to it for scale, something is up. Using our 3D model and crunching the number for the mass with volumetric analysis, this sapient saurian winds up closer to 9 to 13,000 kilograms, or about 10 to 14 tons. But hold on a minute, shouldn't this thing still be smaller than a typical Tyrannosaur? Usually, yes, when it comes to hybrids. But some laws of nature are more guidelines than rules, and even rules can have a few unpredictable exceptions, especially with unexpected meddling. Ligers, the crossbreeding between a male lion and a tigress, can often wind up noticeably larger than either parent. However, this kind of surplus of size called hybrid vigor can be very selective. After all, the inverse, crossing a male tiger with a lioness to produce a tigon, often results in a hybrid smaller than either parent. This difference in size is due to how the genes that control growth differ between lions and tigers. Epigenetic phenomena are changes that can affect an organism's development beyond just the DNA. These changes can affect how certain genes work and how strongly they are expressed. For instance, when two different genomes mix, it can lead to changes in the health, size, and other traits of the hybrid. Factors like certain chemicals, specific growth patterns of species, and the environment can all play a role. In the case of Tyrannos sapiens, it's possible that the T-Rex genes encouraged it to grow large, but the human DNA didn't send the right signals to stop that growth. As a result, the genes kept promoting growth without telling it when to stop, bringing forth this. Grendel, or whatever shady company might have been involved in this monster, might have had a hand in this themselves. Look closely at this thing's back, and notice something neither of its smooth contributors had? Yeah, this horrific hybrid is not just an amalgamation of different species, it is, by definition, a cyborg. Alright, not the T-800 Terminator or Gigan variety though, but something else. These spikes on the back aren't quills or spines from either of its contributors, but implanted control devices. In the John Sayles script that preceded this venture, the trained raptors were augmented with implanted control packs that fed drugs and hormones directly into the brain. These were used on the raptors to make them calm when kept out of combat and brutally violent against a target. Artist Carlos Huante tapped into a similar concept of remotely controlled dinosaurs, much like the brain chips we saw Manticore use in Camp Cretaceous. Had this film gotten by, we might well have seen the two concepts merged together. That's right, this hybrid bruiser might not have just been augmented genetically. Its makers might have been constantly doping this beast man with growth hormones to further bolster its size, and remote controls to change its behavior, making it calm when kept in captivity or eating, and sending it into a berserk rage when pitted against an opponent. The concept art seen on screen shows the extent of the control its creators tried to push upon it. But in doing so and playing Frankenstein, they might have unleashed their own monster. So how might Tyrannos sapiens match up against the rest of the gruesome cast of the franchise? How lethal could this thing be in its stated purpose to kill humans as an attack animal? Let's find out. If there is anything theropods are famous for, it's their jaws. And while the feats of a Jurassic T-Rex bite are all over the place, a consensus everyone can back up is that, yes, this is still a pretty nasty bite, regardless of any drawbacks. Deferring to a bit of science, and we might be able to sort of figure out how deadly this bite could be. First question, how might the chomp of a human nerf this feature? In raw numbers, yeah, it might take a toll. In practice, not as bad as you might think. Humans might be wimpy in the biting department, but we're not the absolute worst. We humans did give up our raw force, being capable of crunching down between 300 and 500 newtons on average across the jaw, sacrificing muscle attachments for a better bite for a bigger brain. A 2022 study on human ancestors indicated that even as the jaws became less powerful, the skull remained very sturdy to withstand strong forces. So, how is this factor with Tyrannos sapiens? Well, considering much of its skull matches up closely to a T-Rex already, this means that the human contribution did not nudge the overall shape enough for a big bite force to be a problem. If you want an exact number, and, well, not to bore you with the math, we did it for you. We'll draw an estimate using a weighted average of a scaled-up 10-ton human with the chomping force of a T-Rex. The final estimate gives us 25 to 30,000 newtons, given that the jaw anatomy leans closer to a T-Rex. Weaker than a Tyrannosaurus, but not by much. Still, enough to dispatch any lesser animal. There seems to be another problem, though. The stance. Can this monster even position itself to fight effectively? Tyrannos sapiens has a much more upright stance and lacks a large tail for balance, like T-Rex. While this build would definitely look intimidating, towering over most opponents, this wouldn't let it be the most noble creature, because its center of rotation would be directly between its legs, just like in a human. This hybrid would be able to turn around very quickly when standing still or in a stride, but when it comes to sprinting and making quick banking maneuvers, that, combined with its high stance, might prove difficult. A sufficiently big opponent might be able to knock it over. Thankfully, it does at least have some means of fighting back besides its jaws, especially if wrestling a foe. Even with shorter arms than a human from the T-Rex additive, its limbs would be helpful to grasp and manipulate objects. Perhaps not as well as an ape given the absence of 3 digits including thumbs, but still much more effective than T-Rex arms ever were. Perhaps more so than the T-Rex, this Tyrannos sapiens will rely more on its brain. The T-Rexes seen in the franchise were intelligent in their own right, with many feats to show that these were adept problem solvers, had good memory, and did express emotion quite well. This thing? Well, this will be the closest we'll ever get to a T-Rex behaving like a human. At best, with limited intelligence, with limited tool use, and shrewdness. But hey, who are we kidding? This thing being conditioned to be a berserk attack animal means that it was absolutely going to get abused. And if malice was what it was treated with, malice is what it would learn to give back. Add in possible hormone surges via implants shutting off pain receptors and amping up its aggression, and Tyrannos sapiens might well have been something even more hateful and villainous than both Indominus and Indoraptor combined. Having even more human-like expressions with more active facial muscles and lips than a dinosaur would, this uncanny manimal might snark, glare, or grin during the attack. For extra unnerving effect to human targets, it's possible the modifications from the human genome also affected the vocal organs. Animals mimicking human speech is a well-documented phenomenon in parrots, seals, and even elephants. Even if the monster couldn't pull that off, there might be some unnerving side effects of having a distinctly human-like scream reverberating amidst its roar. And in the mind of Carlos Huante, something big might have gone up against this hybrid. As he observed, there was one classic showdown, the final heavyweight grudge match rivalry of the Mesozoic that never appeared on screen in a Jurassic movie yet. No, this isn't Dr. Banner. This Hulk-looking bruiser of a giant Triceratops human hybrid could have wound up being the last defense of the heroes of this story against the wise tyrant. At 1.5 meters shorter but with a much brawnier, thicker build to give them equal weight, this bizarre behemoth could still go toe-to-toe against its fellow hybrid. Man-to-man, beast-to-beast, and a spectacle totally unlike anything the franchise ever had. This hybrid, along with an extra, even more creepy raptor human hybrid, will be featured by our friends at Dangerville. Link to their video is below, so go over there and tell them that Goji sent ya. Oh, and tell them Corey sends their primatus his regards as well.